We are on Daf Mem Gimel Amid Aleph. We had seen the Mishnah tell us that there are certain circumstances where a person will be patur from taking a shvuah, either as a moda b'miktsas, when he makes a partial admission, or even when the Torah would normally impose a shvuah on someone who's not a moda b'miktsas, let's say a shomer chinam, who is given something to watch and he's an unpaid guard. If he claims that the object was lost, he normally would have to take a shavua. And so here the Mishnah also had said that in such an instance, if a person denies having in his possession the object that he claims that was lost, and that object is either real estate, a slave, or a shtar, he is excluded from taking a shvuah that normally a shvuah sashomrim would be imposed. So the Mishnah had said that this applies both for a shomer chinam, that a shomer chinam who claims that an object was stolen or lost normally would have to swear, but in this instance, since the object that he was watching was either karka, avadim, or shtaros, real estate, slaves, or contracts, he is exempt. The Mishnah had asked the question why. The Gemara had asked the question why. So the Gemara had said yesterday that it's based on a klal uprat uklal principle. What is that principle? The pasuk referring to a shomer chinam gives a general clause at the beginning and the end, and the middle clause is a prat which specifies chattel. So the derivation that the Gemara had made yesterday, which we're going to do again for the shomer sachar, is that only something which he is watching that is chattel, that is movable, to the exclusion of real estate, and also to the exclusion of slaves, because slaves are scripturally connected to real estate, and also to the exclusion of contracts which are movable but do not have any intrinsic value. They only represent a value that is being recorded in the contract. Also excluded from a shomer chinam shavua is when a shomer chinam is watching an object for hektish. Let's say the Beis Hamikdash gives him something for safekeeping, and we know that is excluded from a shavua because the Torah says ki yitain ish el re'ehu, that if a person shall give to his fellow. Hektish is not the property of your fellow, it's the property of God, and therefore it's excluded from the shavua. Now, this brings us to the next Gemara, which goes through the exact same exercise for a shomer sachar. A shomer sachar who claims theft or loss has to pay for the object. However, we exclude his obligation to pay for those commodities that we've just mentioned, avadim, karka, avadim, and shtaros, and hektish. Those four items that we've just itemized are also excluded from a shomer sachar's obligation to pay when he claims theft or loss. And we go through the same exercise. Minolan de tanu rabban. And how do we know this? Because the rabbis taught, ki yitain ish al re'ehu klal chamor oshor oseh prat v'chol behema lishmor chazar v'kolal klal uprat uklal chulei ad hektesh re'ehu ksiv. Here we just take the different pasuk. The pasuk that refers to shomer sachar in the Torah also has a klal uprat uklal structure, and just like in our previous analysis, the prat structure is only referring to chattel that has intrinsic value. The same thing applies to a shomer sachar's obligation to pay, and therefore his obligation is excluded from those commodities that we mentioned. Plus, it also says there as well that if a man shall give to his fellow, and God's property is therefore also excluded. Now we go on to the next part of the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir Omer Yesh Devarim Shehin Kekarka Ve'enan Kekarka Chulei. There was a machlokas recorded in the Mishnah between Rabbi Meir and the Chacham. And Rabbi Meir's point is that even though you've exempted claims involving real estate from having to take a shavua, nonetheless there are certain things that are growing from the ground that do not have the status of real estate. And the example that he gave was, if let's say Reuven gives to Shimon and says, Shimon, I'm appointing you as the custodian over my field that is growing 10 vines that are growing grapes. And when it comes time for Reuven to reclaim possession of the field, Shimon says, you only gave me 5 vines that were growing grapes, not 10 vines. So in this instance, Rabbi Meir says, granted that this is real estate, but it's something that's growing from the real estate and not the real estate itself, and therefore the standard law of moda b'miktzas would apply here, and therefore according to Rabbi Meir, Shimon would have to take a shvuah because he's a moda b'miktzas. The Chachamim disagree, and they say that anything that grows from the ground has the status of real estate, and therefore he's exempted because of the real estate issue. So Michlal de Rabbi Meir Sover Kol HaMechuber LeKarka Eno Kekarka Adamiflagi B'Tu'unos Liflagi B'Serukos. So the Gemara's question is very simple. It seems like Rabbi Meir is maintaining that things that grow from the ground are not like the ground themselves. Well then, if that's the case, why then does he give only the example of vines that are growing grapes? Let him just say vines simply, regardless of whether they're growing grapes or not. The laws, according to Rabbi Meir of moda b'miktzah, should still apply. So the Gemara's answer is, Amar Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina, Hacha ba'anavim omdos lihibotzer kamiflagi, the Rabbi Meir sover kibitzuros damyan, the Rabbanan savri lo kibitzuros damyan. So the Gemara's conclusion is, we didn't understand Rabbi Meir. Really, Rabbi Meir would agree that vines growing from the ground are like real estate. The only instance where he deems something that's growing not to be like real estate is if it's produce that has already fully ripened and is no longer dependent upon the soil for its growth. And that's why he chooses the specific example. Reuven says, I asked you to watch 10 vines laden with fully ripened grapes. And a day later, Reuven comes back and says, okay, thanks for watching them. And Shimon says, here are your 5 vines. So that's why it's a moda b'miktzas, because the grapes are already no longer dependent upon the soil for their growth, and as such, they are not deemed like real estate. Anything less than that, even grapes that are growing that are not fully ripened, would not have the status of a moda b'miktzas shavua, according to Rabbi Meir also.
Would the same thing apply to a dead tree because it's no longer being nourished? So you could use it for wood?
Interesting question. I don't know. It's a good question. We'd have to look into this. If it's something that's growing from the ground but is not nourishing from the ground. I don't know. It's a valid question. We then saw another discussion in our Mishnah, which was, what if a person makes a claim that is not as defined in its measurement? For example, let's say Reuven says to Shimon, I gave you a large doodad, a large widget for safekeeping, and Shimon says, no, you only gave me a small widget for safekeeping. So in that situation, since measurements are not being delineated, even though Shimon is making only a partial admission, it's not subject to the laws of moda b'miktzas where there's a shvuah. Another example of this was if Reuven says to Shimon, I gave you a house full of grain, and Shimon says, it wasn't a house full of grain, it was only, this is the amount that you gave me, and this is the amount that I'm going to return to you. Or let's say Reuven says, I gave you a purse full of coins. And Shimon says, it wasn't a purse full, it was a dozen coins, right? So again, this is not called a moda b'miktzas because either the claim or the admission did not have enough specificity in measurement or weight and so forth. The only exception that the Mishnah had made was, if let's say Reuven says, I gave you a silo filled with grain, and the grain went all the way up to the ceiling beam of the silo. And Shimon says, you gave me a silo full of grain, but the grain only went up to the windowsill in the silo, not until the ceiling beam. There, because it's absolutely measurable, in other words, measurements are being provided in the claims, so there that is a case of moda b'miktzas. So the Gemara now says we need to fine-tune it a little bit more. Amar Abaye lo shanu ela do amar le bayis stam. Aval amar le bayis zeh mole yediya ta'anose. or aval omar le bayezeh, I think mole is by aval omar le bayezeh mole yedia ta'anase. If a person says in a nondescript way, I gave you a house full of grain or a structure full of grain, that's where it's not specific enough of a claim to qualify for moda b'miktsas. But if Reuven points to a particular structure and he says, I gave you enough grain to fill this silo, and Shimon denies that and says, you gave me less than that, and he says, you only gave me, let's say, half of the silo filled, so then that's enough of a specifiable, measurable quantity, and therefore that would qualify as moda b'miktsas. So Amarle Rava. So Rava says back to him, Ihachi adetani seifa ze omer ad haziz v'ze omer ad hachalon chayav liflog v'lisni b'dida b'med dvar mamurim b'bayis mole aval bayis ze mole chayav. So Rava says, I don't agree with you, Abaye. He says, and I'll prove it to you from the Mishnah. The Mishnah creates a contrast between a claim of I gave you a house full of grain versus no, you didn't give me you gave me less than that. The contrast is I gave you grain up until the ceiling beam, and the guy says no, you only gave it to me up to the windowsill. Well, the truth is you could have told me an even finer distinction between a case which is not moda b'miktsas versus a case which is, and that is you could have said. The first case, which is not moda b'miktsas, is Reuven says, I gave you a house full of grain. And the case which is moda b'miktsas is where Reuven says, I gave you this house filled with grain. And if you're saying, Abaye, that that's enough of a specification of measurement because you can measure the amount of grain that's in that specific structure, so then why didn't the Mishnah say that that qualified as a moda b'miktsas shvua, instead of jumping to a more simple case, or a more self-evident case of where they're disputing as how far the grain went up in the ceiling. Did it go up to the ceiling beam versus did it go up to the windowsill? So Ela Amar Rava la'olam eino chayiv ad sheyitanenu b'davar shebamida shebamishkol v'shebaminyan v'yodelo b'davar shebamida v'shebamishkol v'shebaminyan. And so Rava therefore says, based on the force of this question, I conclude, Abaye, that you are mistaken. That even though the guy points to a house and says, "This, I gave you enough grain to fill this house," the fact that you didn't specify a measurement when you made the claim means that that's not a viable claim for a moda b'miktsas shavua. Even if you could measure the amount. The qualifications for a moda b'miktsas situation is where the claimant makes a claim that includes a measurement, not just a claim that is measurable, but it has to actually include a measurement itself. So for example, if I say up until the ceiling beam, that's a measurement, because you're specifying a certain height. But if I just say a house full, that's too vague, even though you could go and take your measuring tapes and figure out the volume, but that's not, since that claim did not include a measurement, right? It does not qualify for a moda b'miktsas. So the ultimate qualification for a moda b'miktsas of shvua is where the claim is involving a measurement of some kind, either length, weight, volume, etc., and the counterclaim has to also contain a measurement. I gave you X. No, you gave me X minus Y. Right? It has to have a quantifiable measurement. So Tanya Kavase de Rava. Now we have a brisa that supports Rava. Kor tavua li biyadcha v'halo omer ein lecha biyadi potter. So look at this brisa. The brisa gives a number of cases. The first case is Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me a bushel of grain, and Shimon says, I don't owe you anything, so that's potter. There's no moda b'miktsas. Menorah gedola yesh li biyadcha ein lecha biyadi el menorah ketana potter. If Reuven claims you owe me a large lantern that I gave to you for safekeeping, and Shimon says, no, you gave me a small lantern, then that also is potter. There's no, again, and we'll explain why, but in this situation, there's no description of measurement. Ezora gedola yesh li biyadcha ein lecha biyadi ela ezora ketana potter. Similarly, if Reuven claims a large belt, and Shimon claims that I gave you, and Shimon says, no, it was a small belt that I gave you, that you gave me. So, in other words, let's say Reuven says, I gave you a size 40 belt, and Shimon says, no, it was only a size 30 belt. So then that's also not a moda b'miktsas. And we'll see why. Aval omer lo kor tevua yesh li biyadcha v'lo omer ein lecha biyadi ela lesech chayav. But what is a case of moda b'miktsas? Reuven says, I gave you a bushel, and Shimon says, you only gave me half a bushel. That's a clear case of moda b'miktsas because measurements are specified. Menorah bas eser litrin yesh li biyadcha ein lecha biyadi ela bas chamesh litrin chayav. Another example is if Reuven says, I gave you a 10-liter lantern. In other words, a lantern that has an oil well that holds 10 liters. And Shimon's response is, no, you gave me a lantern that has only a 5-liter oil well. So in that situation, that is also called a moda b'miktsas because measurements have been specified, and therefore you're chayiv. Klalo shel davar la'olam eino chayv ad sheyit'anenu b'davar shebamida v'shebamishkal v'shebaminyan v'yodelo b'davar shebamida v'shebamishkal v'shebaminyan. And the final line of the brisa is, here is the general rule. General rule is that there's no shvuah of moda b'miktsas unless the claim involves some measurement or weight, and similarly, the counterclaim has to involve some measurement of some kind. Klalo shel davar la'asuyei mai. Why was it necessary to add that final general rule at the end of the brisa? It's coming for a reason. So lav la'asuye bayezem mole. So it must be to include a case which is not subject to a shvuah of moda b'miktsas, which is the case that Abai and Rava are debating. That the brisa is basically telling me that if a person says, I gave you this house, enough grain to fill this house, that's not enough of a specified measurement within the claim in order to make the guy liable for a shvuah of moda b'miktsas. And that proves Rava's point that even though it's a measurable amount, but since measurements were not included in the claim, it's not subject to a shvuah. Umayshno menorah gedola menorah ketana. Mashatano lohodolo mashahodolo lotano. So now the Gemara says, let's go back and analyze this brisa quickly. Why did we say in the first case that when Reuven claims, I gave you a large lantern, and Shimon counterclaims that you only gave me a small lantern, why is that not subject to a shvuah? So the Gemara says, forget about measurements for a second, there's a much more basic answer, is that the response is not in any way an admission to the claim. In other words, normally when I say you owe me 100, and you come back and say I owe you 50, you're at least making a partial admission to my claim because 50 is subsumed, is a subset of 100. But a small lantern is totally not part of a large lantern. It's not like a small lantern is part of a large lantern. They're two totally different commodities. And so therefore, I'm making a claim on apples, you're making a counterclaim on oranges, and therefore there's no shvuah of moda b'miktsas. So the Gemara says, by that token, Ihachi bas eser bas chamesh nami mashatano lohodolo mashahodolo lo ta'ano. Well, then my question is even if you do include a measurement in the claim, you say that I gave you a lantern that has a 10-liter oil well, and the counterclaim is you only gave me a lantern that has a 5-liter oil well, why is that considered to be a moda b'miktsas where the brisa says you're chayiv? It's like apples and oranges again. So why should that be chayiv? So Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak kacha b'menorah shel chaliyos askinan dekamoda le mina. So a very creative answer. He says, we're talking about an oil lantern that is assemblable in different parts. You know, like certain appliances, you can always add a module to the appliance to make it bigger or smaller, like Lego. So this is like a Lego lantern where you can either have it with a 5-liter well or add to it and make it into a 10-liter well. And therefore the guy is basically saying, is that I gave you a Lego lantern with a 10-liter oil well, and the guy said, no, it was a Lego lantern, but the Lego lantern that you gave me only had a 5-liter. It could have had added to it another portion of it, and therefore it's a partial admission. But wait a minute, if that's the case, Amar Reb Shmuel, so Ihachi Ezoranami Nisni Velukmi B'Dolaifi. But why didn't you make the same distinction by the belt? If the guy says, I gave you a large belt, and he says, no, you only gave me a small belt, why can't we talk about a belt that's made out of multiple loops of leather? And the claim would be that I gave you like a Lego belt, right? A module belt. I don't know what the correct word is. I don't know if I'm using the right words. A belt that can have pieces added to it and subtracted to it, and therefore I gave you a belt that had 40 loops, and the guy says, no, you only gave a belt that had 30 loops, and maybe that could also be a moda b'mixus. Why doesn't the Brisa mention that? Ela delaifi lo ketani, achanami b'shel chulios lo ketani. So the fact that the Brisa does not discuss an adjustable belt means that we're not talking about an adjustable lantern. So we're back to square one. Why is it that there will be a shvuv moda b'mixas if the admission is on a 5-liter oil well versus the claim of the 10-liter oil well? So Ella Omer Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel Shiny Menorah Hol V'Yachal Legoro Lahamida Al Chamesh Litra. The real answer is that any standard lantern has an oil well. And typically the material that it was made out of would, let's say, earthenware. Now earthenware, you could take sandpaper and sand down from the top going down further and just make it a flatter oil well. So you could theoretically reduce an oil well from holding 10 liters to now holding 5 liters if you take a really good sander and sand it down on all sides. So therefore, when the guy's making an admission on a 5-liter well, he's actually making a partial admission, because it is a partial admission on the original item. Whereas by a belt, so Rashi points out that a belt is harder to make that claim, because a belt, if you have a regular standard leather belt, the way it's manufactured is that the head of the belt is somehow finished in some way. That's how they made the belts. And it's not like with belts that we buy today, there's a buckle, and you can take off the buckle when you lose a little weight, snip off a piece of the leather, reattach the buckle, and everything's great. The problem is what happens when you gain it back. That's a separate issue. But the point is that that's not how they made belts back then. They made belts without a buckle. It was just a piece of finished leather. If you were to cut it down, you wouldn't have a finished belt anymore, and it would be recognizable. So therefore, that's not a viable counterclaim of a moda b'mixus by a belt, but it is a viable claim for a moda b'mixus for a lantern. Let's go on to the next mission. Hamalve es chaver al hamashkon va'avad hamashkon. Omer lo selahil v'sicha la v'shekel hayashave v'alo omer lo ki ala selahil v'sana la v'sela hayashave potter. Now here we're dealing with a case of either kofer bakol, a complete denial, or moda b'miktsas, or a partial admission, but here it's with a little bit of a twist. The malve, the lender, says to the love, says to the borrower, when I lent you $100, you gave me a widget as collateral. But unfortunately, my dear friend, I lost the widget. So the love says, the malve says, the widget was only worth 50, even though the loan was 100, so you owe me 50. And the lova says, what are you talking about? I gave you a $100 widget on a $100 loan, and therefore I owe you nothing. So in that case, since the lova is a kofer bakol, he owes nothing. By contrast, selahil v'sicha la v'shekel hayashave, v'halo omer lo ki ala selahil v'sana la v'shlosha dinrim hayashave, chayev. But let's say the malva says, I lent you $100 and I took your widget, which was only a $50 widget, and I lost the widget, so you owe me $50. And the guy says, no, it was a $75 widget, so I owe you $25. So essentially we have a claim now of 50 versus 25. That's a classic moda b'mixas, and therefore the lova has to take a shvuah. So that's the first case in where the malva and the lova are arguing as to whether the widget was of lesser value or of equal value. The next case is where the machlokus is whether the widget is of equal value or of greater value. And so here it's going to turn out that the lova is the claimant and the malva is the defendant, and we'll see. Selahil visani alav ushtayim hayashava v'alo omer lo ki ela selahil visicha alav v'sela hayashava pater. Let's say the malva loses the widget, And the lova now takes him to Beis Din and he says, listen, I gave you collateral of a widget that was worth $200 on a $100 loan, so you owe me $100. And the malva says, no, the widget was only $100. So in that situation, the malva is the one who's kofer bakol, and therefore doesn't have to take a shvua. But selahil visani lav u'shtayim ha'yashava, v'lo omer lo ki ela selahil visicha lav v'chamisha dinrim ha'yashava chayav. But in this case, where the malva loses the widget, and the lova now claims, listen, the widget was worth $200 on a $100 loan, so you owe me $100, and the malva says, no, the widget was worth $150, and I only owe you $50, so that is also a case of motive b'mixas. Here the malva is the motive b'mixas, and has to take a shvua. Umi nishba, misha hapikadon etzlo shema yishba zeh v'yotzi halo es hapikadon. Now, who takes the oath? Says the Mishnah, the one who last had the pikadon in his possession, the widget in his possession, is the one who takes the oath. Why? Because we're concerned that if we allow the other claimant to take the oath, maybe after he's sworn the value, the other party will produce the widget and say, aha, you're a liar. Everyone can clearly see that it's not worth what you swore it was worth, and this proves that you're not only not to be trusted in this case, but you're pasal le'edus in all cases. And we want to avoid that situation. We want to avoid a situation where a person can be incriminated by his own words permanently, and therefore Chazal said that in all cases, we make the person who last had the widget in his possession to take the shvua. Now the Gemara is going to say, what is that statement going on? Which case in our Mishnah is it referring to? Ahaya. Ilema aseifa v'tepok le'deshvua gabe malva. Who? He says it can't be referring to the second part of the Mishnah, where the malva is the motive b'miktsas, because there the reason why the malva has to take the shvua is because the lova said the widget was worth 200. The malva says it was only worth 150, therefore I owe you 50. The reason why the malva has to take the shvua is not because he was the last one known to be in possession of the widget, but rather because he's the motive b'miktsas. So you don't need the Mishnah to tell me that he takes the shvua. That's self-evident. So Amar Shmuel Aresha, v'chein Amar Reb Chia bar Rav Aresha, v'chein Amar Reb Yochanan Aresha. So all of these Amoraim say, no, of course it's going on the first part of the Mishnah, where the claimant is the malva, and the motive b'miktsas is the lova. And the Gemara just clarifies, my reisha seifa de reisha, the second part of the reisha, where the lova is a motive b'miktsas. Where the case was, selahil visicha alav v'shekel hayashava, v'halo omer lo ki ela selahil visani alav v'shlosha dinrim hayashava chayav, d'shvua gabi loivahu, v'shaklua rabbanan milova, v'shadjuha amalva. That basically what we're saying is as follows. Really, by rights, the lova is the motive b'miktsas, because the malva said the widget was worth 50, so you owe me the remaining 50. The lova says the widget was worth 75, so I only owe you 25. The lova is a motive b'miktsas. He should be the one by all rights that the Torah says takes the shvua. But the rabbis reverted the shvua, basically reversed the shvua, and instead of placing it on the lova, they placed it on the malva, out of a concern that should we allow the lova to take a shvua about the value of the widget, the malva could say, aha, here is the object, the widget, and everyone can see that it's only worth $50. So therefore, we want to avoid that situation, and will therefore allow the malva to take a shvua that the widget was worth 50, and the lova will have to pay the $50. Now, that's our initial thinking, but now the Gemara says we need to modify that even further. V'hashta da'amar Rav Ashi de kaimelon zeh nishba she'ena birshuso, v'zeh nishba kama shaveh hachi ka'amar, mi nishba techila misha hapikadon etzlo, shema yishba zeh v'yotzi halo es hapikadon. Rav Ashi in Bava Metzia, after a long discussion over there, comes to the conclusion that we're not taking away the shvu of motive b'miktsas from the lova, but rather we're adding a second shvua onto the malva. In other words, yes, lova is going to take a shvu of motive b'miktsas, but we want to be careful to avoid a situation where he will be exposed as a person who lies flagrantly in Beis Din, and therefore we will also make the malva swear that he doesn't have the widget in his possession. And therefore, when the Mishnah asks the question, who swears, it's not saying who swears and who doesn't swear, but it's asking the question of who takes the oath first. And the answer is, we make the malva take the oath first, so that we eliminate the possibility that he'll be able to produce the widget. We make him swear to us that you don't have the widget in your possession, and only after he takes that oath, we then turn to the lova and say, now you take your oath of moda b'miktsas. Fine. Omar Shmuel, Haiman da osve alfa zuza lechavri moshken lekata demagla, avad kata demagla, avad alfa zuzi. Shmuel tells us a huge chiddush now. He tells us that if Reuven lends Shimon $1,000, sizable sum of money, and he asks Shimon for collateral, and Shimon, he's a poor schlepper, he says, what do I have? He says, I have a handle of a sickle. I originally said a scythe, and someone said, no, my translation says sickle. So I said, what's the difference between a sickle and a scythe? And we started arguing this morning, one handle, two handles, it doesn't matter. We'll call it a sickle.
Just a nickel.
So anyway, but the point is that a sickle handle is worth maybe $10, $20, certainly not worth $1,000. But Reuven, out of the goodness of his heart, said, okay, I'll take that as security. Here's an interesting halacha, says Shmuel. If Reuven then loses the sickle handle, he loses the whole rights of collection of the loan. Because basically what he's done is that he said, I agree that this is in lieu of payment of the loan. So because he's willing to say that, if he loses the sickle handle, he's lost his $1,000. Now, hold on. All of your questions will be answered. Please don't ask anything just yet. Avol tarte katoti lo. But let's say Shimon says, look, I don't have collateral, but I have 2 sickle handles. You can have them. A big macher already. So now Reuven has now 2 sickle handles. So in that situation, it's clear that, let's say, Reuven were to lose 1 out of the 2 sickle handles. Could now Shimon come back and say, okay, half the debt is wiped out? He says, that we don't say. That we don't say. Rav Nachman Omer afilu tarte katati, avad chada, avad chamesh meya, avad idach, avad kulei. Rav Nachman disagrees, and he says if Reuven was willing to take 2 sickle handles, he's basically implying that each sickle handle is worth $500 of the debt, and therefore if Reuven loses 1 sickle handle, he loses half the loan. If he loses both sickle handles, he loses the whole loan. Aval kata vinaska lo. But let's say Shimon gives him collateral of 2 items that are clearly of disparate value. So he gives him a sickle handle,
Not the same.
not the same value. He gives him a sickle handle worth $20. And then he says, and I have a bar of silver that's worth $500, right? So I don't have $1,000 collateral, but at least I have $550. If that he gives, so then it's clear that neither commodity as an individually is meant to compensate for half of the loan because they're not of equal value. So there, for sure, we would just assign it a dollar value that gets deducted from the loan. And Nahardoi Amri Afilu Kata Vinaska Avad Naska Avad Palga Avad Kata Avad Kule. And the rabbis of Nahardoi say, no, nothing doing. Even if there are 2 items of 2 different values, the fact that Reuven was willing to take them, if he loses the silver bar, then that value of the silver bar of $500 is wiped out. But basically, the rabbis of Nardos say that he's taking 2 items and he's dividing the loan over those 2 items. And therefore, if the silver bar is lost, half of the debt is wiped out. And if he loses the sickle handle, the other half of the debt is wiped out. Tanan. Now let's look at our Mishnah. Everything that Shmuel says is not going to work with our Mishnah. Because Selahil visicha alav v'shekel hayashava v'ala omer loki ela selahil visani alav u'shlosha dinner hayashava chayev. Now, what was the first case of moda b'miktsas? The Malva says the widget was only worth $50 on a $100 loan. And the Lova says it was worth $75. So we make the Lova take a shvu of moda b'miktsas. But wait a minute, doesn't the Lova have the valid time and say, wait a minute, you took a $50 widget on a $100 loan. Too bad, you lost the widget, you lost the loan. because that was coverage for the loan. So you lost the coverage, and therefore you lost the whole loan. I don't have to pay you anything. So lema leha kibilte. So the Gemara answers masnisin b'de parish, Shmuel b'de lo parish. So the Gemara says very simple. Shmuel's not arguing with our Mishnah. Shmuel is simply saying that our Mishnah is talking about a case where when the Malva accepted the substandard, in other words, the widget which is not worth the full value of the loan, he said explicitly this is not full coverage for the loan. If that was stipulated at the time when he accepted the collateral, so then the Malva has a right to turn around and say, even though I lost the widget, I still expect you to pay the balance of the loan, right? But Shmuel is saying if that was not explicitly stated at the time when Reuven took the collateral, there's an assumption, it's implied that my taking the collateral is full coverage for the loan. And so therefore, even though the sickle handle is worth $20, sorry, you're out of $1,000 loan. So lema kitanai. Let us now suggest that Shmuel's contention is a machlokes tanoim. Hamalvis chaver al hamashkon vavad hamashkon yishba v'yitalas ma'osav divrei Rabbi Eliezer. If a person lends money, Reuven lends money to Shimon, then Reuven loses the mashkon, then basically what's the halacha? Reuven has to swear that he doesn't have the mashkon, and he can collect his money. That's according to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Yachalu sheyomer lo klum hilvisani el ala mashkon. Avad hamashkon avdu ma'osecha. And Rabbi Akiva says, what are you talking about? He said, the love can always say to the malva, you lost the mashkon. The only reason you lent me the money was because of the mashkon. So if you lost the mashkon, that's coverage for the entire loan, and therefore you don't get to take anything from me. So doesn't that imply this machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, what we're talking about? So the Gemara will speak it out in a second. We'll just finish the brisa first. Aval hamalve elav zuz bishtar v'hiniach mashkon biyado divrei hakol avad hamashkon avdu ma'osav. But everyone would agree that if the malva lends $1,000 in a shtar and the lova leaves a mashkon, everyone would agree that if the mashkon is lost, then the loan is completely canceled, because since it was recorded in the shtar that this is the collateral, once the collateral is lost, everyone agrees. Now, heichidami, let's go back to the machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. I deshavi shir zuzi, my time at the Rabbi Eliezer. If the widget that was taken as mashkon is the equivalent value of the original loan, why would Rabbi Eliezer say that if the malva loses the mashkon, he's still entitled to collect? What right does he collect if the mashkon is a wash for the loan? So elalav bidalo shavi shir zuzi uvidishmul kamiflagi. So it must be that the machlokus is that the widget that was taken for the mashkon is worth less than the face value of the loan, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that since the mashkon is not full coverage for the loan, I'm entitled to collect the balance of what is owed after we deduct the value of the widget. And Rabbi Akiva disagrees. And Rabbi Akiva holds like Shmuel, who says, no, since the widget was given in lieu, as part of the collateral, it is in lieu of payment of the loan. And if you lose the widget, you lose the whole loan. So the Gemara says, lo. B'delo shavi kuli alma les lehu de Shmuel, v'hacha b'deshavi shir zuzi u'v'de Rabbi Yitzchak kamiflagi. So the Gemara says, not necessarily so. I could argue that everyone disagrees with Shmuel. Both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva would hold that if the widget is less than the value of the loan, then everyone would agree that you have a right to collect the balance. But what's the machlokas over here? It's about Rabbi Yitzchak Shita, about where the mashkon is the value of the loan. It was a loan of $1,000, the mashkon is worth $1,000, and here's the machlokas. The Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, minayin lebalchov, shekona mashkon, shene'amar, ulacha tiyeh tzedakah. Im eno kona mashkon tzedakah minayin lo, mikan lebalchov shekona mashkon. So the answer is that Rabbi Yitzchak has this fascinating shita. He says, look at the pasuk. The pasuk says regarding collateral that when you return collateral to a debtor, it's considered to be an act of charity. Now, if I don't own the mashkon as the creditor, what charity am I giving by returning the collateral? It must mean that as soon as the debtor gives me the collateral, I immediately become the owner. Now, if that's the case, then when I lose the collateral, I lose the loan. That's Rabbi Akiva's shita. But Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that when I take the collateral into my possession, I'm not the owner. I'm simply a shomer chinam. I'm an unpaid watcher on something that belongs to you. And if there's a legitimate claim of loss, what's the halacha of a shomer chinam who loses an object? Does he have to pay for it? No, you don't have to pay for it. You just have to swear that it was truly lost and that you didn't take it for yourself. And then you're off the hook. So basically the Malva's claim, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is, I'm sorry that I lost your $1,000 widget, but you still owe me the money. And that's Rabbi Eliezer's shita. So that's the machlokas, and we'll talk about this further, Mitzvah Hashem, tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.